Welcome to Supporting Tennessee Educational Outcomes with Open Education, a presentation that is part of the Open Education Week series coordinated by the Tennessee Higher Education Commission, or THEC. I'm Joshua Nave, Director of Academic Affairs at THEC, the state agency that supports and advances higher education. Part of my work focuses on initiatives that promote open and affordable course materials, including coordinating our textbook affordability task force and our OE Week activities. I'll be monitoring the chat throughout today's presentation and collecting questions for our presenter to address at the end. I'll also share three items in the chat: the schedule of this week's events, my email if you'd like more information or want to get involved, and a brief anonymous survey that gathers your feedback on this session, along with your perspectives on statewide needs and barriers related to open and affordable course materials. Now, I'm happy to introduce today's presenter, Levi Fleming, Scholarly Communications Librarian and Associate Professor at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga.
Yes, hello, and welcome. I'm Levi Fleming, a scholarly communications librarian at UT Chattanooga, and I'm happy to set off this week's programming with overview of how open education supports strong educational outcomes. Just a little bit about myself as scholarly communications librarian here at UTC. I've been working on course affordability and open education since 2017. And I've been involved with THEX initiatives since 2018, and I'm really excited to see all the progress that we've made over the past few years. My agenda for today is to provide a bit of a policy overview and an elevator speech that you can adapt and use for your purposes. And then I'll be able to also provide a brief summary of the findings of the 2025 THEC Open Education Report. So all of our state educational institutions, public and private, from TCATs to flagship and research universities, we all have a common goal: to enroll, educate, and graduate students. And we all know that cost is one of the most significant barriers to college attainment. Tuition and fees continue to trend upward, although they flattened out recently. This graph um, is less scary than previous years because it shows that costs across state higher education institutions are up about 125% of what they were 10 years ago, but costs are up 150% of what they were 15 years ago. So it's flattened out a little bit in recent years. So costs are an important barrier, and part of those costs are, of course, housing and books. Steadily rising tuition fees are indicated here in this graph in orange and purple, but the cost of college textbooks is in blue, and you can see that was rising very dramatically until about 2017, and that rise began to falter and even come down due to concerted nationwide efforts to reduce course materials costs. And I want to stress that this change didn't just happen like naturally. Intervention and action by faculty, institutions, and students made that change happen, and continued action is needed to maintain that change towards affordability. So, what does this cost of uh, books mean? The cost burden isn't just you've got to eat some ramen noodles. Students are facing really dire financial challenges that make college attainment even more difficult. So, in this 2021 Hope Center Real College Report, finds that a third of students are food insecure and that nearly half are housing insecure. The report also looked at the uses of emergency aid during the COVID-19 pandemic, and that gave some really interesting responses. Their respondents reported that they used that emergency fund to stay enrolled in school and to purchase educational materials at the top of the list, along with essentials like food, transit, and housing. And reducing stress is also on that list. And when you consider the mental and cognitive strain that comes from not knowing if you can afford to continue education or pay for food and gas, you know that reducing stress is having a huge impact on actually educational outcomes. Um, and course materials are only part of the cost burden for students, but they're particularly worth considering because they're often an unexpected expense at At UTC, for instance, 20% of our students report being first generation, so they may not be aware um, how much that they're going to end up needing to pay for course materials. And then secondly, because they're an expense that both faculty and students have choices that they can, exert their will about. So, how much do course materials cost nowadays? I just updated these slides, and the costs are going down, which I like. So most of our institutions report somewhere between 12 and $1,400 for course materials and supplies, and that's based on a little bit older College Board report studies. And in these newer versions of the College Board report, they separate course materials from other supplies. So now with a number about $330, which is in line with what the National Association of College Stores, the bookstores report for course materials, and then a large portion of other money that could be notebook and pens, $150 graphing calculators or computers and things like that. Um, so for some of us who have achieved stability in our lives, it's hard to imagine $330 a year as a sizable amount of money, but we know that a student account balance of less than $100 can cause students to stop out and not continue their education. So 330 is a big burden on some of our students. And students can't change what the tuition and fees are, but they do have choices when it comes to books and supplies. And students report making difficult choices about textbook purchases. The 2020 Public Interest Research Group report confirms what surveys have said since 2014, and these results continue to be found in local and national surveys that two-thirds of students have skipped buying or renting textbooks because of costs. In UTC, a survey we conducted, a quarter reported often skipping purchasing textbooks. And then even more concerning fact from the newer PIRG report is that almost 1 in 5 students report skipping purchasing access codes, meaning that they're not able to complete their online homework. And that is despite over 90% of students being aware and worried that skipping those purchases will affect their performance in their courses. So textbook costs affect students' ability to meet their basic needs and to graduate on time. Um, and they know it, and they're still making those difficult choices to not purchase textbooks. I can and you can be confident in sharing these realities because of how often these things have been shown over and over. I haven't updated this slide, so it stops in 2021, but I'm certain that there are new studies that also show these same results. Um, Students earn poorer grades. They report earning poorer grades, withdrawing from classes, and taking fewer classes because of textbook costs. Students delay taking required courses with expensive books, choose sections and even majors based on textbook cost, and they report that they work extra hours and even skip meals or ration gas to afford textbooks. The cost of course materials means that students have to triage their expenses, so they might purchase an access code for a course so that they can complete the homework, but then not be able to afford a required textbook for another course. They might have to wait until they get an additional paycheck to purchase a textbook, and by that time, it's a few weeks into the semester. The Virginia Course Material Study done in 2021 had an interesting breakdown of how course materials can disproportionately affect some of our students. They looked at how their response to high course materials costs broke down over students with areas of concern. So these are students who are eligible for Pell Grants, students who have caretaking responsibilities, students with documented disabilities, those kinds of things. So when you look at this graph, when we talk about a number like 38% take fewer courses, so this first group, um, 38% take fewer courses. That means 24% with no areas of concern take fewer courses due to the cost of course materials, which in and of itself is pretty alarming. But when we add each additional risk factor, that number increases. So a Pell eligible first generation student with caretaking responsibilities is now at a 50% chance of taking fewer courses. So course materials costs exacerbate those gaps between student group. Those results all combined means that course affordability is an issue for the majority of students and a crisis for some of our students. And part of an argument in favor of open education is about academic freedom, student engagement, and high impact instructional practices so that it isn't just all about the money. But I want to make the point that it is definitely also about the money because, as our colleague Dr. Robbie Milton says, students can't learn from textbooks that they can't afford. Students know that, and they are still making choices trying to uh, achieve, but struggling because of the cost of the course materials. So, much in the same way that students have the choices about course materials and whether they purchase them, how they manage their academic load um, to be able to afford course materials, institutions and college faculty also have choices when it comes to course materials and how we can make our educational offerings more effective and engaging while reducing course. And we're empowered and obligated to do so by state and federal law that work towards um, higher education affordability. So the Higher Education Opportunity Act of 2008, I don't think there's a new one yet, is the latest reauthorization of that act that was originally published in 1965. And Section 133 addresses course materials, focusing on twin goals of reducing costs and increasing transparency for students. So students need to be able to be aware of the cost of their course materials at the time of registration so that they can make informed choices. And the intent of this section, as reported in this summary, is for everyone to work together to identify the ways to decrease the cost of course materials. More locally, in Tennessee, we also have a state law that addresses affordability, passed in 2007, requiring public education institutions to develop policies related to textbook affordability. And that code includes several more specific regulations that are very much in line with the HEOA. And it also requires faculty to consider the least costly course material options. I've got the whole language here, but I will not read it. And passing this law in 2007 wasn't the end of the concern as far as policy from the state. So in 2021, the Office of the Comptroller of the Treasury issued a report on college course materials affordability initiatives across the state. And more recently, THEC has um, done a statewide survey and released that as the 2025 Tennessee Open Education Report, which includes a detailed analysis of current practices, identifying areas for improvement, needs and opportunities, and specific recommendations for action. And we'll get into what that says a little bit later on. But first, I do want to talk about what else we're doing to um, address affordability. So there's a wide range of textbook affordability programs um, from the bookstores, from university libraries, from institutions. But much of our HEOA regulation is focused on transparency about course materials costs. And a lot of that does come from campus bookstores who know how much the books cost. And campus bookstores are an important part of the course materials affordability landscape, and they offer many cost-saving services like buyback, price matching, print and ebook rentals, choice of format. And bookstores are increasingly offering inclusive access programs where students are directly billed for books and access codes unless they opt out. And the prices for those inclusive access materials can be significantly discounted because of the increased sell-through for the publishers. A note on the bookstores, and this is, I want to carefully add this because I believe that our campus bookstores are on the side of the students and working towards more affordable course materials, but it's simply the way of the world that book publishers are in the business of selling books, not in saving students money. So many publishers have been developing strategies such as ebook only purchase and ebook only rental that basically eliminate the secondary textbook markets and other cost saving strategies so that you can't, you know, rent a print version or buy back a print version or share a textbook in an e-only environment, even if those prices are reduced. And from a student perspective, that looks like if a textbook is discounted to $60 instead of $100, but you don't have any dollars, it's not a help to you. Where if my roommate was also taking the same course as me and we can actually share our book, that does help me. So by eliminating those options for students to share, to purchase used copies, that's really negative to the range of options that students have. Similarly, direct billing programs under different brands, both on the individual course and the institution-wide level, are created by bookstores, and their primary drivers to stabilize distributor and publisher revenue. So student savings is a byproduct of that and only achieved again due to the concerted effort of faculty and affordability advocates. So when we adopt inclusive access for chemistry, we go straight to a publisher and negotiate with them. We can negotiate a discount for our students, but that doesn't happen without that effort to leverage what we're selling the publisher, which is our students for X number of years. So if we're not carefully investing in how we're getting affordability out of these programs, they don't do it automatically. So again, this is not, an indictment of publishers. This is just a description of publishers working to do what they do, and they're trying to salvage what they can of the status quo in a shifting environment. So if you hear pitches from publishers, from bookstores, the really cynical thing for me to say to do is to compare it to what they say in their quarterly earnings reports. So that's as far as I go. Again, on campus, our bookstores are, I would say, just very, very student focused. And the programs can result in significant student savings, but they're just one part of a whole range of affordability options, and that's what I've got on my slide. Uh, so affordability programs can leverage the large holdings of our campus libraries. They can take advantage of the growing availability of open textbooks, and that can grow to include full degree programs with zero cost for course materials, or the Z degree programs. There's a lot of different components to affordability. And one of the great things about affordability is OER. I'll spare you the full and complete history of the OER movement and simply provide again a brief definition of OER. Open educational resources are part of a broader open culture movement. Think open source software or open access publishing. Those have been active for decades. OER have really been coming into their own in the past few years with increasing support in the form of state mandates and state, federal, and private funding for resource development. So on the slide is the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation definition of OER, and put it even more simply than what's on the slide is OER any materials which are in the public domain or have open licenses which allow broad use and reuse of material. Open licenses work in conjunction with copyright to allow certain uses of materials to broad groups of users without needing to get permission from the copyright holder. So Creative Commons licenses are a popular type of that license and frequently applied to OER. And that array of licenses allows a range of uses, some more strict, some more open. So these can be limited to non-commercial use or no derivative works. And I mentioned this copyright status and how open licenses work because that adaptability of material is a key component of why open materials are valuable. And we'll see that in a couple of examples I give later on. Why do we support open educational resources? It's because their effectiveness has been shown through a growing body of research. In the beginning of the movement, we just believed that it was true and good to have materials openly available, but more and more we can show that it is true, that it's good to have materials that are open. The Open Education Group tracked published research on OER efficacy for many years, and they've published original research as well as meta studies. And they also work to develop some a methodological framework to address some of the difficulties that were coming up in these efficacy analyses. So they developed this framework that addresses the cost, outcomes, usage, and perceptions of OER. And those efforts have helped coalesce and develop a more robust corpus of research over the past few years, so much so that the group no longer monitors every OER article. They don't have the capacity to do that anymore because so much uh, is now being produced. And some key highlights of that efficacy research is that studies have shown that OER results in increased student performance in overall grades, increased persistence, lower drops, fails, and withdrawals, increased retention, and then we also see in the um, Colvard Watson Park study that positive outcomes in those areas of student persistence and performance were magnified for underserved groups, which means that OER can be a part of a strategy for closing achievement gaps. In the Bowl study that I have linked in the slide, students in the OER sections of that study were retained and persisted at a statistically higher rate, so at a significant higher rate. Um, um, so the take homes from these studies, from Hilton's two meta studies that reviewed the extant literature in 2016 and 2020, found that OER use resulted either in no change or an increase or a benefit to student learning outcomes, and that student and faculty perceive OER to be of equal or higher quality than conventional textbooks. So his study leaves us with this question: if outcomes using OER are equal to or better than conventional textbooks, how can we justify using conventional textbooks? What are we asking our students to pay for? And our colleagues, um, Natalie Hoskins and Katie Gruber at MTSU, studied student perceptions of OER in their general education public speaking course. And they found that in general education, student perceptions about textbooks are extremely negative. Students they don't like paying for them, they don't think they're useful, and those negative feelings about textbooks in gen ed, engender more negative attitudes towards the institutions like, why are you making me pay for this? So even when the materials are good, Hoskins and Gruber find that the merits of those materials don't outweigh the concerns expressed by students, and that it would be beneficial to use OER because of these student concerns. More generally, when we think about effective teaching, we want to envision a world where learning technology and course materials support pedagogy, not drive it. So instead of teaching to the textbook or whatever text we can get, we want to teach the classes as best they should be taught in the professional opinion of the instructors. Using OER supports high impact instructional practices, and those are the practices that are proven to increase student engagement and performance. OER can be driven by the educational goals of faculty and cater to the educational environment of the students, whether it's seeing their future in the workforce or seeing their communities in the materials, or other kinds of practices. So here are two quick examples of that. First is a book that is now in its second edition, although I've got a picture of the first edition here, Strategies for Early Learners, which is a text by UTC Professor of Education, D.R. Meese. And he used material that was originally created and published under an open license by Jennifer Paris and colleagues at the College of the Canyons in California as that introduction to curriculum for early childhood education. But that was, of course, written for California. So Dr. Meese created an adaptation of the original text, which integrates Tennessee standards, and he rearranged the material so the chapters all proceeded like his instruction did. so students didn't have to jump around in a book and feel like the book wasn't made for them. He made it for their class, and he even added additional content in his area of specialties. So instead of using an off-the-rack textbook, students in Strategies for Early Learners are able to access a free, bespoke textbook that perfectly aligns with how the course is taught. And another example of seeing your community uh, in your course was shared in earlier Tennessee Open Education Week from, again, colleagues at MTSU, their custom textbook for Intro to Education that is a book adaptation that integrates local materials. And it's this podcast that follows schools that are in Nashville. So they're saying their nearby community and maybe the community that they're from reflected directly into the textbook. And because of the format of the textbook, this isn't like an additional link out. It's like right in the textbook. So they get a seamless experience that shows themselves in their course materials that increases their engagement in the course. So that is the end of part one. Now I'm going to pivot and talk a little bit about what we're up to in Tennessee, as shown in our 2025 Open Education Report. So we've made notable progress in embracing OER as a tool for enhancing affordability, but some gaps remain. So THEC conducted this survey to establish a baseline, identify barriers, and inform future efforts. With those primary objectives of assessing what's going on in the state, all kinds of institutions, what are the barriers, and then figuring out what these results tell us that we can be doing. The study was conducted data gathering in spring 2024 and then analyzed from some great folks at ETSU who put together the report. I was really amazed and impressed by the response rates from the state institutions where nearly everyone from community colleges, public university, and TCATs provided responses, and that we got some penetration into the private institutions as well, although not a full reporting from those institutions. Um, so the survey covered several areas. Um, First off, what is currently going on in affordability programs and policies, whether institutions have official definitions of OER, what affordability initiatives are going on campuses, and then examination of institutional use of affordable materials. What are the adoption rates of instructional materials, all different kinds, inclusive access, OER, other kinds of affordability programs, and then looking at those numbers in different types of courses, gen ed, CTE courses, undergraduate, and non-degree courses. And then if any of those degrees or pathways that have no associated textbook costs. So I mentioned Z degrees earlier. So what do institutions have those Z degrees? Looking at leadership and collaboration, what structures support OER at institutions, um, either individuals, committees, if policies exists, and then who and what are key contributors to OER initiatives, awareness, and collaboration with other institutions. And then looking at the resource enables, like reviewing what kind of financial support those programs are getting, and reviewing what kind of training and incentive mechanisms are designed to encourage faculty adoption. And then, of course, looking at future needs, highlighting potential support and strategies that might assist institutions in expanding OER adoption. Um, so the key findings. Um, I was trying to put this together, and there are so many great facts in these little charts that I couldn't pick among the graphics, so I ended up with a boring bullet list. So I'm sorry about that, but I do have one chart for you coming up. So key insights about OER adoption in Tennessee: community colleges are leading the way. Um, OER are most prevalently adopted in general education. I think both of these things fall national trends. Um, for student cost burden, um, TCAT institutions report the highest percentage of students um, directly paying for their course materials costs. And that is in comparison to community colleges that have significantly reduced that burden through OER adoption. Funding disparities. So to date, although things have changed in the state, community colleges reported getting the most state support for OER, while public universities are relying on internal funding to fund their programs. And then the TCATs report that the funding gaps limit their ability to start and scale initiatives. Faculty-driven initiatives, faculty play a central role in affordability, but institutional incentives such as stipends, making sure that folks get credit in their tenure and promotion materials remain limited. Um, Respondents also indicated that institutions lack effective methods for communicating affordable options, and that limits students' access to information about affordable courses and about the initiatives that we're doing in their interest. Um, Lack of OER impact measurements. Most institutions don't employ a systematic method to collect data. And then in support needed, faculty need training, awareness, and incentive structure. Institutions can benefit from centralized leadership, policies, and student-facing awareness. And then for the state, um, sustained funding, streamlined data collection, and coordination to support scale. And here's where I did get a chart for you, 'cause I think is pretty interesting. Um, so among the institutions with lower adoptions, the private institutions and the TCATs, you can see that the dominant needs are for faculty awareness and OER training. And then where there is awareness in the community colleges and the public institutions, those respondents indicated predominantly that their incentive structure was support that needed to be increased. So you can see how the progression goes from we need awareness, but even with awareness, we find that we do need incentive. So the recommendations, if we can break these down, to expand OER funding and incentives. Um, so increase the state funding for OER development. And there's a key opportunity here for technical and vocational education that fills that need for the TCATs. State support can also be beneficial uh, in supporting faculty through stipends and formal recognition to encourage scale training and awareness campaign. The report proposes offering regular discipline-specific OER workshops and targeted outreach, particularly for those institutions with lower engagement, and equipping teams with tools that can promote OER. We can collaborate with institutional partners to create OER for high-demand fields like healthcare, engineering, computer science, especially for TCAT programs. Strengthening oversight structures looks like institutions might benefit from centralized leaderships to coordinate OER efforts. And then at the state level, facilitating collaboration, resource sharing, and progress tracking can support institutions in aligning OER efforts with broader strategic goals. And we have a great set of practices that have been working in the community college. So how can we share those models and those resources from community college through workshops and through peer networks for broader adoption? And then finally, enhancing data collection, um, implementing standardized framework to track OER impact, savings, faculty engagement, and providing tools and training to support data collection and reporting. And as I was, reading through this report, I can see through my work in the task force that these recommendations are really guiding THEC's work in open education and affordability and driving new engagement in our initiatives so that we can build sustainable programs at our institutions that effectively collaborate across the state that support our statewide goals. So for OER funding and discipline-specific OER, we can support the creation of OER that are aligned with workforce needs, And that's a model that other states and federal funders have been using. Programs like Open Education Week, this programming that we're doing right now, play a role in um, generating the community um, and supporting the collaboration across institutions that can share best practices. And then enhancing data collection is aligned with THEC efforts in statewide data collection. So that's an area where we can work on definitions, tools, and training to support consistent data collection and reporting that forwards our goals and shows once again some of the outcomes that I went over in the first policy half of this presentation. So that is the very briefest summary of that report. And that's all I've got for today. So we can have a quick conversation. I'm happy to answer any questions